So the next question becomes, well, did these Christians that had this Christian worldview, did they have this idea that church and state should somehow be separate? So I always like, when I do this class for students, I always like to start out with a little quiz. So you're going to get invited to a quiz. The quiz is, in which of the founding documents do we find that phrase, separation of church and state? And here's your choices. Was it A, in the Constitution, or B, a little bit earlier, Declaration, C, the Bill of Rights, or D, the Federalist Papers, which were a series of essays written by James Madison, John Jay, and Alexander Hamilton to kind of convince the American people that we needed a federal constitution. We needed to get away from the Articles of Confederacy and have a more federal approach to government. And so how many of you, just not to embarrass anybody, but just how many of you think, well, it's got to be in the Constitution? Okay, I see a few hands. All right. How many of you say, well, no, it's in the Declaration of Independence? Not too many takers there. How about the Bill of Rights, First Amendment and all? Okay, I got most of the hands went up then. Or how many say no, it's in the Federalist Papers? All right, you got a smattering there. How many of you think it's a trick question? Yes, see, because really and truly it was a trick question, because the answer is none of the above. It actually came from a letter that Jefferson wrote when he was president. Many of y'all know the story, to the president of the Danbury Baptist Association, because there had been this vicious rumor floating around. They must have read it on the internet or something. This vicious rumor floating around that America was going to establish the Congregationalist denomination as the official denomination of the country. And the Baptists were concerned about this, and Jefferson said, no, we're not going to have an official denomination. You're saved. You can continue to be a Baptist, and that's not a problem. Not in any of the founding documents, and it's totally been taken out of context in America today. So let's take a look at some of these founders and what they had to say. We mentioned Washington earlier during his farewell address. Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. Notice he's not talking about economic prosperity, social prosperity. He's not talking about academic prosperity. He's not even talking about spiritual prosperity. He's talking about what? Political prosperity. In vain would that man claim the tribute of patriotism who should labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness. Probably a subtle stab at Thomas Paine during that day. But he says, Washington says, the founder, the first president, the father of our country says, you can't even call yourself a patriot if you subvert the role that religion and morality play. And don't give me this stuff that you can have morality separate from religion. He says, experience and reason both have shown us that cannot be the case. National morality cannot prevail in exclusion of religious principle. And Washington understood this. Now, I love this picture of Washington. I've got to see this. It's at Washington Lee University in Lexington, Virginia. And just a little aside note here, I don't know how many of y'all can see that thing that's around his neck. And how many historians in here, and you can't answer, Chuck, know what that thing is that's hanging around his neck? What is it? Okay, you're absolutely correct. It is a symbol of military rank, but what's the history behind it? You know that. It's called a gorget. And a gorget originally was the part of a knight's armor that went around the neck. And over time, they kind of made it smaller, and they just hung it around the neck symbolically to show military rank here when he was a colonel during the French and Indian War here. And interestingly, for you real historian buffs, you will recognize that as the crescent moon on the South Carolina state flag. Long may she wave, all right? Many people, somewhere along, you can see the dimensions of that show. That's not a crescent moon, and many people in South Carolina don't even recognize that connection. A little side note there. Now, you know, that may be the million-dollar question. Now you won't even need to use a lifeline. You've got that information. Noah Webster was an educator of the day, very influential. He wrote a book called Advice to the Young. He really ought to change that to Advice to the Young and the Old, because I'm going to tell you, there's a lot of good stuff in there, and you ought to take the time to bother to read it. Small book, used to train a lot of America's youth during those ages. And he said, look, the best source and the best rules of morality can be found in the Bible, and the moral principles and precepts found in the Scriptures ought to be the basis, the foundation, for all our civil constitutions and laws. James McHenry, one of the signers of the Declaration, said, the Holy Scriptures can alone secure to society order and peace, and to our courts of justice and constitutions of government purity, stability, and usefulness. I love this guy, Robert Winthrop. I call this his Bible and bayonet speech. I just kind of envision him as being a guy that's, non-politically correct, that's just willing to speak boldly during that day. He's kind of like the Chuck Baldwin, of the day, I think. And he's just standing up and just speaking the truth with boldness. And he says, all societies of men must be governed in some way or another. The less they may have of stringent state government, the more they must have of individual self-government. You ask the average person in America today, what does it mean to be self-governing? And they'll say, Tuesday I get to go vote. And that's what it means to them. That is not what it meant to the founders. What it meant to the founders was you better govern yourselves. We're trying to establish a system of government that is constitutionally limited. Therefore, you must govern yourself. Because if you don't govern yourself and control your own passions and your own desires according to scriptural mandates, then this isn't going to work. And they understood that. He went on to say, men, in a word, must be necessarily controlled either by a power within them or a power without them. Either by the Word of God or by the strong arm of man, either by the Bible or by the bayonet. I kind of would rather have the Bible, than the bayonet, but that's me. Sam Adams, the father of the Revolution, had some interesting things to say. The only true basis, foundation of all government is the laws of God in nature. For government is an ordinance of heaven. We saw that in Romans chapter 13, designed by this all-benevolent Creator. Cousin John comes along. Cousin John, Sam Adams says, it's religion and morality alone which can establish the principles upon which freedom can securely stand. The only foundation of a free constitution is pure virtue. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of it doesn't work for the government of any other kind of people. We've seen this throughout the history of the world.